Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode from Richard's Tech Tutorials. Today we're going to be looking at the My Notes application again. Now it's been a few weeks since I've last did a post, so apologies for that everybody. Been a bit busy with a few other things which we'll talk about later on. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the My Notes application again, and we're going to go through two things. We're going to go through clicking on a note in the list view that you saw at the bottom. So if I bring up my UI Builder. So what we're going to do is when we click on this particular view we have here, so this list view, I want to click on that and for the note to appear in this box at the top. Okay, so once we've done that, we then want to have a button that we can click to update that note. So we're going to do a retrieval of a note and we're going to do the update of a note. Now there's various steps involved in doing this, and I'm going to walk you through both stages. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to walk through the retrieval of the note and the various different the various different pieces that I did to do this. Now I'm going to be using GraphQL queries for this, just simply because they take a little bit of setting up, but then they do give me the ability to pass the text through properly that I want to within these particular fields. The reason for that is because I'm passing in quotes, backslashes, all the kind of special characters which don't format very well if you use the global control. Apologies. Right, so let's get on and walk through that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the client state parameters that we added in. So I added in a couple here. So I added in the note sysid. So note sysid that you see here is going to be the internal ID on the record for the note. So I can, when I go to update it, I can do that through the particular note sysid. So I've kept that information. Now a new note, probably not the best name for this, but is going to hold the actual note. So when I click on the note and retrieve it from the database, that's what we're going to have. And then hide update, we're going to use for basically making that control. You saw I had a control there. Just come back. I have a control here, so a button, but I've kind of disabled it. So I can't click on that note until such time as I've got a note to update. Makes sense, really? So what we're going to do first, let's walk through what's going on. So the first thing we need to do is when somebody clicks on here, we need to retrieve that information of the line item that they've clicked on. So if we go to the list view, I've got an event firing called reference link click. So when I click on one of those reference items, it fires off this event. That event, as you can see here, it fires off a client script called note clicked. So here we go. So note click doesn't do a huge amount. So when somebody clicks on that particular note, we just want to retrieve the sysid of that particular record. Now, if you're not sure what's being passed through, it's usually in the event that will be, because when the event occurs, because we're attaching it to an event, a payload will get passed with lots of useful information in. Best thing to do if you're not sure, just do like I've done before with the event debug. Use the event debug to just find out what's in that data structure, and then you can pick out what you need. I've been using it with something else here, but in this particular one, the payload has got the sysid as one of the top fields. So I can just read sysid. And all I'm doing with that is putting the sysid into the state parameter. Now the reason I'm doing that is because I have a data collection object associated with that particular client state parameter. So in this case called getNote. Now you'll see an error here because I don't have an ID set in the note sysid, so it's coming back saying, oh, that's a mandatory field. But as soon as we have a record ID in there, it will go off and collect that. Now because this is bound to this state parameter, as soon as I change the state parameter, this control will be invoked. And that's why we have it set to only when invoked. If we did it on the other one, which is the immediate, it only invokes when the page loads, and we don't want that. We want to invoke it when we update the sysid. So once we do that, it will go off to the database, retrieve the record, and then pass it back to us. And we have an event. So as you can see here, as we build these, we do something, it fires off something, then updates something else, which fires off something. It's the event-driven way of building these applications. If you're used to building very long, procedural kind of applications, this can be a little bit different, but just think of lots of little events that are occurring as you navigate your way around the application. So we're going to execute, we're going to retrieve the data and that then's going to kick off the client script that we've got called note retrieved. Now, note retrieved is then going to read the data that comes back. You'll notice there's a very long string here. We'll go into that in a sec. And then it's literally updating the two parameters that we have, two extra client state parameters we have called new note, which is what we're going to associate with the text box here, and hide update we're going to set to false. We'll come back to that. Now, to get the data, you've got choices here. You can use the global retrieve record control that is there. But what I've done here is I've created some new GraphQL queries. So if I just come back, let's go back one more. I've got 3 of them, and we'll talk about all 3. So we've already been through the insert new note query that we did, which was inserting a new note into the system. The one we're going to look at now is called get note. So that's quite simple. It's not going to mutate server data because we're reading the data back, so we're not updating the data. And what we're going to pass through to that is a bunch of properties. Now, okay, in this case it's one property, it's just the sys_id. Now if I wanted to do extra queries and stuff, I'd pass that information in here, but for the sake of this, to keep it nice and simple, we're just passing in the sys_id, and then what we're doing is that then it's going to run a query, and that query is going to do a glide record query on our new table called XSNC notes. So remember that table we created before, and the results we want to get back is the sys_id. We just want the value for the sys_id, the note value, and display value. Now you'll notice here, and this threw me several times when I thought I'm keep expecting to put commas in because this looks like JSON formatted code, but it's not. So you don't need to put commas in. If you put commas in, it kind of causes a few problems. So look at the structure, pause the video, and see how we've done this. So at each field, you'll notice that the value and display value, text fields, lookup fields, they all have them. So the value is the internal value that's stored in the database, whereas the display value is if it's a choice field or a lookup or something like that, that's the value you're going to show on screen. But for the text, display value and value, they're going to be the same thing. Now I didn't have to bring both back, but I chose to in this case. Okay, so that's my GraphQL query that I've done here. So if we go back to our app, so that's going to fire off. Now you will notice it says API data get note 1, so that's what we've got within our code. So that's our data broker called get note 1. Could have given it a better name, but for the sake of this example, this will do. It's going to output, and it's going to output some data. Now you'll notice it says glide record query, then the table and results, which if you go back to our broker, so we get notes here, it's glide record query, table, and then results. So that's the structure that we're expecting to come back. Okay, so if I scroll, if we just make this a little bit bigger, so let's just expand that out and just scroll it over a little bit here. So what we're doing is we're going to go to API data, get note, output. It's very long, but we get there. Now you'll see I've got results 0 because I'm only retrieving one record, so I don't need to iterate through the results that come back, and we're getting the note value. Okay, so we're then going to update the client state parameter as we said before with that field that comes back, and set the hide update to false, so that text button appears, not text button, that push button appears. Okay, now the control itself, if we come back to the config, let's move that out of the way, you'll see we've bound the value to the state new note, because that's obviously where we're updating that. So what will happen is when we update the state new note parameter, it will then update, it will then fire off an event that tells this control, you're looking at this particular data item, you need to refresh. Now that's fine, but what that doesn't do is when somebody types, it doesn't put the value back into that field. To do that, we have to use an event, and that event here is called text area value set. So whenever somebody types into that field, it's going to fire off this event, and we're simply putting back the value which comes through in the payload, which is the value you see in the text box. We're putting it back into that new note field, and that's it. So as you type, it's just getting stored in that client state parameter. Okay, great. So that's great. So what we'll do is we'll do a quick preview of that. So let's just open the URL. So we've got a number of different notes here. These are my example ones, as you might have guessed. You know, if I click on it and click on another one, click on another one, as you can see, it's pulling back the information from that text box. Now, I can, in this case, make the text box bigger and smaller, depending on my note. But as you can see, that's all working lovely. My button has now become enabled, and that's where we're going to move on to the next step. So that's great. We're getting the note from the database. It's all working fine. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't always fire off, so you need to be aware of that. Great, so let's flick back to App Engine Studio and let's look at the next part. Right, so the next part of this is we now need to do the update of the note. So, you know, we filled in the text area. We're going to assume somebody's going to type into that and they're going to click the update note. Now, that control we have here, called button circular 2 in this case, is firing off an event called update note. Really original. And that's running a script called update note. If we let's make that full screen. As you can see, we've got our handler in here. I'm pulling out the note ID from our state parameter. I like to do that within these scripts to grab that information and store it locally. Now, you'll see I've got this set as a var. That was in a previous version of this. I was doing some updates. So I was doing some stuff to the actual data that was coming back. Now I could put that back to a const because it's going to be read-only. I'm just literally holding it and then passing it on. So don't worry about it being a var and const. You can use either in this case. So just remember, with a var, you only need to use a var if you're going to update the data in that particular variable. Okay, great. So we just output to console what we've got here. So this is just to remind me. You'll see I put lots of logging in these. The main reason being that if I change the script and I'm trying to test it, I like to change the text that I put in these particular client scripts, just to make sure the client that I'm running this on has downloaded the updated script. Because, you know, browsers, they do a lot of caching of information. They don't always update that cache. So in this case, I want to make sure by changing the text that I'm running the right code. And if not, I will refresh the browser, clear the cache, do stuff like that. Okay, so that's why I do this. So we're going to create a constant for the update note, and we're going to pass in 2 values. Now, before we go any further and talk about this, I want to explain about this particular item. Now, if we go back to the GraphQL that we had earlier, you'll remember there was 3 of them. Let's go back. We had the insert note from before, and we got the get note, which we've just been through, but there was one more, and that was this update note. So this update note is doing a mutation because we're updating the data in the database. And we're going to pass in 2 parameters, the sysid and the note itself, because I'm not worrying about updating anything else. And if I did, I would need to specify those in the properties here, so I'd know to specify all the different data items. And then what we're going to do is run a query, and this one is a mutation, and we're going to pass in the sysid and the note. You'll notice for the sysid we have string with an exclamation mark at the end. Glide record mutation, and we're going to run an update on our table, the SNC My Notes app table, table, and we're going to pass in the sysid and the note field. Now, the sysid, we want to update the value, so what we're doing is we're creating this data structure, and it fills in the gaps as we need to. Again, as we mentioned before, it's not JSON in the sense of what you're looking at here, because you haven't got the commas or the colons or anything like that. This is just a data structure that the GraphQL uses, so don't get it confused with JSON. That's what I kept doing that, and that was causing problems. So you've got sysid and note, and we're passing in value and display value. Now they're going to be the same in this instance because it's just a text field. And what that's going to do is going to execute that, and then it's going to finish for us. It's going to do what we need it to do. So if we come back to App Engine for a sec, so the constant value, the const that we're doing, we're passing in the sys-id in the note. Now you remember that from the GraphQL, we define notes, and it's the note field and the note value in its case, which is the new note or whatever we put in that text box. And then we're going to try, so I like to put catches around these just so I can catch if there was a problem, just do something with it if I need to. We're going to call API data, so as we do with all the other ones, API data. Now this is our data control update note, and we're going to execute this JSON. So we're going to pass that through, and then we're going to do a thing to refresh the list view. Now I'll talk about that as well. But what that'll do is update that note in the database and then refresh the list that we see on screen. So let me just walk you through what we're doing here. So notes refresh, client state parameter that we've got here. So type JSON, can be a string, but I like to use the JSON just simply because of the data structure that we're using. You'll see in a minute. In that particular client script, you'll see we're passing in a timestamp with date now, and it's in curly braces, so it's in JSON format. That's why I've set that as type JSON, and we're setting the timestamp to now. The reason why we're doing that, if we come back, let me just shrink that back down again, is this list view. If I come back to the configuration, scroll all the way down to the bottom, under advanced, we have a refresh requested. Now I've bound that to this particular notes refresh field. So that notes refresh, then going to kick off, it's going to say, right, I've set a value, I've updated the time, it will kick off a refresh of that list. So let's have a look at that one. If we flick back to our screen here, just going to quickly do a refresh. So I've got my note, and I'm going to put in a couple of carriage returns, more information, and we're going to hit update note. And as you can see, that list now is updated with the correct information. So it's working as I would expect. There we go. I'm going to update note, and it's passing that all through correctly. So there we go. What we've done here is we've added 2 extra GraphQL queries to make our application work better. So one of them is retrieving the information when we click, and the other one is updating it when we pass that information back. So as you can see now, we've pretty much built all of the various parts we need of this particular application. In the next episode, hopefully not too long, I'm going to add another control where we're going to do delete. Now hopefully you've seen how we've gone about all of this. You'll be able to work out how to do that, but we're going to run through that anyway in the next episode. Please like, subscribe, leave some comments in the area below in YouTube, and yeah, thank you very much. By the way, I've been also doing some stuff with Olama, the open source LLM, and I've been setting that up with ServiceNow, my ServiceNow instance, and using the LLM inside some applications. So hopefully we'll do some episodes on that in the future. I can show you how you can leverage things like different LLMs within your applications. Great. Well, thanks everybody, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.